Hello and welcome to this GCSE Biology mini-masterclass. In this session, we'll be looking at all of the key facts related to the heart. So the structure of the heart, blood flow through the heart and through the major connecting blood vessels. This is relevant to both foundation and higher tier students across all exam boards. Let's get cracking. Right then, so we've got an image of the heart here. With two different colours, red and blue, just to help us understand the flow of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, which we'll talk about in a moment. And we've got some arrows showing the direction for blood flow. Obviously, the main function of our heart is to pump blood. There are four chambers labelled there. We have two atria and two ventricles. Remember, the left is on this hand side and the right is on this hand side. You need to imagine the heart on the page in front of you as being inside somebody's body looking up at you. So their left and their right are the opposites to what you would naturally point out if asked to point out your left and your right. Now, there are four main blood vessels connected to our heart. Two of which are arteries, one there, pulmonary artery, and one here, the aorta. And we have two major veins, okay? So we have the pulmonary vein and we have the vena cava. You don't need to know the superior and inferior vena cava. You can just refer to them as the vena cava. Some people say vena cava as well, by the way. Either is acceptable. So remembering the flow of blood through those blood vessels, some students like to remember the arteries, A for artery, A for away, so they transport blood away from the heart. And you can see those arrows there showing blood moving away from the heart through the aorta and the pulmonary artery. And for veins, vein in, they transport blood into the heart. And again, you can see arrows shown here for the vena cava pointing into the heart, and for our pulmonary vein, again, arrows pointing into the heart. Now, the actual pumping action is controlled by muscle contractions. At the end of the day, the heart itself is comprised of muscle tissue. The left-hand side of the heart is responsible for pumping oxygenated blood, shown in red, and the right-hand side of the heart is responsible for pumping deoxygenated blood, shown in blue. Please note that you do not have blue blood. The colours there are just there to help us compare the two different sides. And of course, the two different sides are separated by the septum, which is this thick piece of muscle running up the middle here. Now, in order to remember the flow of blood through the heart and the connecting blood vessels, one way of remembering this is using vava lungs, vava body. Okay, and we've got this simpler image that's popped up here to help us remember the flow of blood. Okay, so if we consider the right-hand side and the left-hand side, vava lungs refers to V for vein, A for atrium, V for ventricle, A for artery, and then that blood will be transported to the lungs. Of course, it's deoxygenated, so it needs to become oxygenated at the lungs. And of course, it would be removing carbon dioxide as well as a waste product at the lungs. Deoxygenated blood will now flow through a vein again, into an atrium, down into a ventricle, and then once again out through an artery, in this case our aorta, out to the rest of the body. Okay, so all of the other cells, tissues and organs of the body, with the exception being the lungs. Okay, so vava lungs, vava body can help to remember the flow of blood through the heart and the connecting blood vessels. Valves, those of course are required to prevent the backflow of blood. So we can see here some of the valves shown as almost like little doorways between the atria and the ventricles, and then from the ventricles to the respective arteries that they're connected to. Okay, so they prevent the backflow of blood. Exam question time then. So we're going to have a look at a few exam questions now. I'm going to do these first ones as a little bit of modelling. So I'm obviously going to be using my trusty bug technique to help unpick the questions when I approach these. B for box or brackets the command term, U for underline any key information, and G, of course, in your exam, doing a little glance back as part of a proofread, checking our answers before moving on. So I'm told that figure 10 shows an image of the heart. First thing I'm going to do for reference is label the left and the right. Okay, this is going to help me with the rest of the questions as I approach them. I've been asked which blood vessel transports blood with the highest oxygen concentration into the heart. Now, Vava lungs, Vava body can help me out with this. So if I'm thinking about into the heart, it's got to be a vein. So it's got to be A or D, showing arrows pointing into the heart. And if it's the highest oxygen concentration, it has to have come from the lungs. So I'm going to be looking at the left-hand side of the heart, and that vein is going to be shown as D in this case, and that would be my pulmonary vein. For the next question, I've been asked which blood vessel transports blood at the highest pressure, and I've been given a little bit of information about what blood pressure is here, the force of blood against the walls of the blood vessels. So the highest pressure is going to be from an artery, and it's going to be from blood pumped from the left-hand side of the heart. Remember, on the previous page, we saw that the muscle of the right ventricle is thinner than the muscle of the left ventricle. And the reason being, the left ventricle has to pump blood at a much greater distance, at much higher pressure, all the way around our body, right down to the very tips of our toes. So the one that's going to be pumping blood at the highest pressure away from our heart has got to be C, our aorta. Next, the correct order for the flow of blood through the heart to the lungs. Again, Vava lungs, Vava body's going to help me out here. So, vein, atrium, ventricle, artery, lungs. Now, none of them start with vein, so I've clearly got to begin this process with an atrium, and we're looking at the right hand side of the heart when we consider Vava lungs, Vava body. So it's got to be our right atrium, so it's going to either be the third or the fourth one, into our right ventricle, again, third or fourth, and then it's going to be out of an artery. In this case, it would be our pulmonary artery. Either way, even if I didn't know it was the pulmonary artery, if I was considering the third or the fourth box, the only one that ends in artery is the third. So that's got to be my answer. Final question, I've been asked to describe what would happen to the flow of blood in the left side of the heart if the bicuspid valve did not function effectively. Now, some students would see this and think, I don't know what the bicuspid valve is. I don't know which valve that is in the heart. You don't have to know the individual names of the valves. It's been labelled on the diagram for us. So, the bicuspid valve is the valve between our left atrium and our left ventricle. The function of valves is to prevent the backflow of blood. So, I would be looking at an answer whereby I would say there would be a backflow of blood if this valve didn't function correctly from the left ventricle into the left atrium. That would be 1 mark. Therefore, second mark, less oxygenated blood, because the left-hand side is responsible for pumping oxygenated blood. Less oxygenated blood would be pumped to the body. That would be my second mark. Right then, we've got another question to consider here together, where the question is asking us to describe the pathway of blood through the heart, starting at the vena cava and ending at the aorta. We've got an example response shown here from a student, and what I'd like to do is pause the video and see how many marks you think that would be worth out of 6 with each structure that's been correctly identified in their answer, being worthy of a mark. Okay, so pause the video and we'll see what you think in a moment. Right, so they're not going to get a mark for referring to the vena cava at the start of their answer. Reason being, it tells us that in the question. Their first mark will come from the correctly stated right atrium as being the first chamber through which blood will flow from the vena cava into the heart. They've then stated the right ventricle, again for a second mark. Before being pumped out to the lungs, well, they've not said through which blood vessel that occurs through or what happens at the lungs. They've not mentioned gaseous exchange or anything like that, so they can't have a mark for that. They have then mentioned the pulmonary vein for the return of blood from the lungs to the heart, so they can have a mark for that. They've then stated the left atrium and the left ventricle correctly in order before then blood exiting the heart through the aorta. So that is a very good 5-mark response. Now, there's quite a few bits they could have mentioned to achieve 6 marks. They could obviously have mentioned the blood vessel through which blood flows from the right ventricle to the lungs, being the pulmonary artery. They could have talked about what happens at the lungs, as well as referencing valves. Okay, so that is a strong response from our student, but several of the bits they could have mentioned just to bump that up to 6 marks. Right then, one question for you to have a go at. This is a lovely question here where you've got to apply your knowledge of the structure of a human heart to that of a fish, which is shown in the image here. Okay, we've got the heart and the full circulatory system of the fish shown here. It's a 4-mark question. Pause the video and have a go at describing the differences between the circulatory system of a fish and that of the human circulatory system. Right, so if we were bugging the question, that's the command term and all of the keywords underlined. You will get 1 mark for referencing that there is only 1 atrium in the fish, but 2 atria, which is plural of atrium in a human. Same can be said for the ventricles. Okay, 1 in the fish, 2 in a human. If you've not got a mark so far, but you've said there are 2 chambers in the fish heart, but there's 4 in a human, you can have a mark just for that alone. Okay, so that's an alternative 1 mark to these 2 here. There's only 1 major vein and 1 major artery connected to the fish heart, whereas obviously we know there are 2 in a human. So we could be up to possible 3 marks in total so far here. Only deoxygenated blood travels through a fish heart. Okay, obviously the fish heart shown here, blood returning from the other capillaries of the fish body, but none obviously coming directly from the gills of the fish, equivalent to the human lungs. Whereas obviously human heart is able to transport both oxygenated and deoxygenated, with it having a left and a right. Finally, an alternative 4th mark that we could mention is that there's only a single loop to the fish circulatory system, whereas a human circulatory system has 2 loops, or a double pump system. So several different ways there to get 4 marks. And that's mission complete. If you found that video useful, please do hit that like button and support the channel by subscribing to Science Mini Masterclasses. See you in the next one.